Hi, I'm Nathan Lusk from Warrior with a Pen Games, and today we are going to take a look at Huang, a Three Kingdoms board game. We've recently talked about my Three Kingdoms card game, and now we're gonna actually talk to the board game. This is the absolute first game I ever made, and the card game came shortly after it, but I've remade several parts of this a few times, and in fact I'm actually remaking the board right now, and it is 100, maybe 1,000 times better than the board you see here. This board is the one I've used for the last several years. It's relatively small. It makes it a little hard to move around on. I'm making a much bigger one. It is not going to be little squares like this one is. It instead is going to have actual grass and topography and desert and things like that on it. Actual mountains instead of tiny little graphic triangles. Water instead of these tiny little white representations of where the rivers are. And it has actual bridges and actual cities, not just names for the cities, but it has actual cities on it and then the name next to it. It's really cool, and it should be done soon. Once I get it printed, I'll make a video showcasing it. But this game has been playable for, I don't know, something like 10 or 12 years. It's really expansive. It contains a lot, and you're allowed to do a lot of things within the game. It is complex, not hard, but there's a lot of moving parts. Each of the 6 different forces that you can choose from has a variety of generals that you get to decide between. For instance, if you want to choose to be the Red Army of Sun Jian, you begin the game with Sun Jian and Han Dong already on your team because they don't cost you anything. See, Sun Jian and Han Dong are free for the Red Army. Every force, every faction has 2 generals that do not cost them anything to put on the board. And in all of them, it is the leader of that faction plus 1 generally minor character that is in support of that leader. For Liu Bei, it's Liu Bei himself plus Liao Hua. For Cao Cao, it is Cao Cao himself, or Cao Cao, depending on what translation you're listening to, and Li Dian. And then for Yuan Shao, it is him and his son Yuan Tan. And then for Liu Biao, it's him and Lei Bo. So these are the those are just the free ones you get for every team. All of your other generals you actually have to pay for, but you get to decide who they are. Never are any of your generals hidden from you. So Liu Bei basically can go through his entire roster, figure out exactly which generals he wants to start with, but he has to be able to afford to pay for them, and then start them in his cities on the board. Now the board, you know, we're not actually going to play the game, so let me remove all of these standees. The board, this is as it sits now. It's going to be relatively the same as the new board. It's just going to look a heck of a lot better, and it's not going to be gridded off like this one is. But the board shows you how many cities there are. Any city that's within a non-gray country or region means that that is a city owned by one of the beginning forces. If it's in a gray region, then it's a city that is not owned by any of the beginning forces, and anyone can move an army there and take that city and add it to his cities. And that's important because all of your cities, each of your cities provides a particular amount of income to your army that you are allowed to use to keep generals on the battlefield. For instance, let's just use Liu Bei as an example. His capital, Chengdu, provides 4 gold per turn. And then his other cities each provide certain amounts of money every turn so that he can use that money to buy generals. The total, which is important, what you do is you span those down just like this, kind of stack them where you can see the amount that they produce, every turn, just at a glance. And you know that to start the game, Liu Bei has a total of 4, 2, 6, 9, 10, 11, 13, 15 gold to buy generals. So after he chooses himself and Liao Hua, because they're free, he goes through each of his other generals and searches for ones that he wants to pay for, that where the cost seems to be worth it for the benefit of having that general. So Jiang Wei, for instance, look at his numbers across the top. He has an attack of 2, a defense of 3, a movement of 1, and the number next to his name right here is how much he costs, 3. So 3 is the most expensive you can get. So he might keep looking. He's also looking for value. See, here's another expensive one, but look at that. Attack and movement, 3, 1, and 3. For Ma Chao, he costs 3. He's got some other pretty cool guys in here that he would definitely consider, especially his big ones. Zhuge Liang, always consideration. Huang Zhong is always a consideration. He also has Wei Yan, a 3, 2, 1 for only 2. That's a really good price. Zhao Yun is a 2, 2 with 3 movement for only 2. Zhang Fei, massive, really good character. And then of course, the God of War, Guan Yu. He costs 3, but you get 3, 3, 2 out of him. Totally worth it. So he has to decide which one of these people he wants to employ to start the game. He puts them into his cities with little standees that represent them. And then everyone else does that as well, up to 6 players. And then once the game begins, they move around and try to take provinces. The goal of the game is to be the first player. Well, it depends on how you want to play. If you play Total Annihilation, of course, it's to be the last player standing. If you're playing an abridged version because you want a slightly shorter game, then you can play where a kingdom is knocked out when their capital is conquered, and that's totally fine. But that makes a difficult game, especially because Cao Cao's capital and Dong Zhuo's capital are directly next to each other. So you have to be very careful in that area. Those two are right next to each other, right at the beginning of the game. And it's a tough one-on-one fight right there because there's no way either of them can get help. The other way to play is just to go with whoever has the the first player to get 4 capitals wins the game. So that's another option for that. And the capitals are in different font than the rest. See, that's a capital, and that is not a capital. You see the difference in the font there. It's just a brighter font on all of the capitals. And then you also, of course, want to take over as many of the free lands as you can hold because you get cash for them as well. Particularly Jiaoji, which is hotly contested between Sun Jian, Liu Biao, and Liu Bei in general. They fight over it consistently because it's worth just as much as any capital. It's worth 4 production per turn. That's 4 is obviously getting at least 2 generals out of your deck and onto the board. So it's a really, really good property to take over. Great province for a force to hold. So if you noticed as I flashed through some of these players, many of them also have special abilities. They're not just attack, defense, and movement. They also have special abilities. For instance, Guan Yu has a special ability that, oh gosh, I haven't even talked about why it's a special ability yet. And it's technically an optional rule, but it really adds some flair to the game and makes it a bit more flavorful while you're playing it. You can use troop type differences. It's more of a rock, paper, scissors difference, but it's not quite that cut and dry. Any cavalry unit that is fighting away from mountains and water, in other words, there are no mountains and no water touching the province that they are in, touching the one square that they are in, they have a +1 attack bonus. Any archer unit defending a city has a +1 attack bonus. And any infantry unit attacking a city has a +1 attack bonus. And that is the kind of the rock, paper, scissors of the units. There is, in fact, I think, yeah, that may not have even been exactly what it is. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, the archers are +1 defense when defending a city. The only way to cancel that is if the attacker is heavy infantry or heavy cavalry, which those units will say on them. Instead of just infantry, it'll actually say heavy infantry. Infantry is +1 offense when attacking a city, unless the defender is also infantry, so they cancel each other out. And then cavalry, it says when attacking a square without a city on it, cavalry is +1 offense, unless the opponent is spearmen, pikemen, or halberdiers. But heavy cavalry will get this bonus regardless of the defender's troop type. So +1 attack unless your opponent is spearmen, pikemen, or halberdiers. But if you're heavy cavalry, those don't even count either. And I should have referenced that first because I was so smart when I first started making games that I actually made all of the rules onto cards. And there are enough of these for all 6 players to have their own set of rules with them to quickly reference during the game. The first one tells you what order the players go in. It also tells you what a turn is, so that when you get to the next card, the turn sequence, you know exactly what you're doing during your turn. And then special actions. These are the 5 different skills that different characters may or may not have, and it tells you how to use those skills. Then there's the troop type bonuses, which tells you the different bonuses that the different types of troops get. This one is about movement. Tells you how you can move around the board, that you can't go across mountains or rivers unless you use a bridge on a river, so on and so forth. And then combat, it tells you how to score combat. And combat's pretty unique. You roll a number of 6-sided, so the attacker, the person who's declaring the attack, rolls a number of 6-sided dice according to his attack score. The defender rolls a number of 6-sided dice according to his defense score. And the dice are compared highest versus highest, next highest versus next highest, etc. For every die that beats the other, a health point is lost by the loser. So you score health hits, whether you're the attacker or the defender, as long as one of your dice beats one of your opponent's respective die. Excuse me. And then in the case of a tie, both lose a health point. If one character is rolling more dice than the other, then all of the dice over, so in other words, if it's 3 dice to 1, those 2 extra dice both count as hits against the guy with 1, because he's just less talented at that type of either offense or defense. Yep, that's pretty much most of it. Oh, and the last thing, you can only, you have to be very selective when you're choosing the people that are in your army, because let me find the rule. I know it's in here somewhere. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not in there. Well, there is a rule, for some reason it's not on one of the cards, that you can move a number of your characters per turn according to the number of capitals you own, which everyone starts with 1 capital. Your leader can always move himself, so there's 2. And in fact, it's actually 2 generals for every capital you own. Let me start over. So you can always move 2 generals per capital that you own. So later in the game, if you've taken over someone else's capital, you're allowed to move 4 generals just with that alone. Your leader can always move for free, so that gives you 3. And then for every tactician that's in your army, you're allowed to move 1 more general. So in other words, if you have no more tacticians, you only have non-tacticians in your army, you are allowed to only move 3 people during your turn. Your leader has to be one of them, and then any other 2 that you own, unless you have more than 1 capital. So even though you may have better generals than some of your tacticians, you generally have to use some of your tacticians, even if they're not your better characters, because you need the extra movement, at least until you get more cities and can free up more money for more generals later in the game. So there are a lot of things to consider. You have to weigh the game, weigh the benefits of certain characters substantially. You need to keep the tacticians in the game, but also have your good generals out there. Have people in the right positions to attack and defend, especially considering what their unit type is, and be moving toward the free territories to see if you can score a few easy gold, which means that you can't just look at the attack and defense of your generals. While it is important, you also need to look at the movement of those generals. Last but not least, when a general takes damage, he has a health counter over here on the side, and that health counter is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's no tokens on him as he takes damage, but as he gains, he only has 5 health. So as he gets hit, he slowly loses health until he has, maybe 1 or 2 left. And then if he takes the last hit, he is removed from the board. A die is rolled, and the person that defeated him rolls a 6-sided die. And then if it comes up as a 1, 2, 3, or 4, your general escapes, and you can bring him right back whenever you feel like it, if you can afford to. If your opponent rolls a 5, he has captured that general, and he is now allowed to recruit and use that general if he chooses to. If he chooses not to, he can just keep him captured. But he keeps him captured in the city closest that he already owns, closest to where that general was defeated. And if you can, and so he takes that character card here. Let me show you. Say Liu Bei had one of his generals captured in, there it is, Chang'an. Say Liu Bei lost Guanxing to Dong Zhuo, and he was captured. And Dong Zhuo captured him right outside of Chang'an. So Dong Zhuo has his cities lined up, and he's going to take Guanxing and he's going to slide him under Chang'an, and that's how it's going to sit on the table. And now it reminds Liu Bei and Dong Zhuo both that if Liu Bei can ever go take Chang'an, he will get that general back. The only exception is if Dong Zhuo does decide to recruit him, he can go ahead and pay the cost for that general and put him on the board. And that general then becomes part of Dong Zhuo's army for the rest of the game. Unless, of course, he's captured again or killed or something like that. When a general is killed, it goes into a dead pile that lord manages, that player manages. And to resurrect someone from a dead pile, you have to waste 2 coins on a turn, just taking that person from the dead pile to back to your stack of people that you can recruit. And so that's 2 gold worth of generals you could have had on the board that you chose not to put on the board so that you could resurrect that guy and use him again in the future. And depending on the general you're resurrecting, it is generally worth it, especially for guys like Lu Bu or Guan Yu, or any of the powerhouses that some of the teams have. I think that's most of the information. The board's a little small to play on right now, so I'm not going to worry about doing a play test. We might do one at another time. Oh, and then last but not least, I'm sure you noticed this gigantic deck of cards right here. Every time a new player begins his turn, he draws card from the top of this deck that's been shuffled before the game. And it is either a new general that he can recruit if he chooses to, or it is an event that takes place immediately in most cases, depending on what the event is, or, and some of it actually just provides money, or it's a cool brigand that appears on the board and fights whoever owns the land where it shows up. If it shows up in your own province, then that brigand actually joins your team. If it shows up in someone else's province, then you control the brigand during your turn, but it's not actually part of your army. And then there are also equipment pieces. Here's one. You could draw an equipment piece as well, like this spiked mace, which you could equip to one of your generals by basically holding out the cost of it, which in this case is 1. You could hold the cost of that out one turn, put it on someone, and so you have 1 less general gold-wise than you could afford. And then next turn, since you've paid for this the last turn, you'd be able to use that 1 gold to put a general back on the board. It'd go back. It would work out. But here's what's important. If you draw this and you choose not to use it, you leave it on the board in front of you. And any other player during the course of their turns, if they choose to use the equipment or general that you drew, they're allowed to take it since you didn't want it and use it for their army instead. And free generals are considered to be a part of your army for the rest of the game, unless of course they're captured, in which case they would go to whoever captured them. And events typically play out exactly when they're drawn. They may have a different timing listed on them, but for the most part, they just happen automatically. So if you draw an event, boom, it happens. So this is Huang, a Three Kingdoms board game. And I appreciate you checking out the video, coming to see my page. Like all of my other games, I need artwork on this game. So please go check out my, my gosh, what is it called? Go check out my Patreon page and take a look at all of the games, all the different levels that you could support me at. It's as low as $5 a month. I'm sure there's something there that you'd be able to afford. And it will help me get artwork put on all of these games so that I can get them either put on Kickstarter or get them manufactured and out to stores and ready to go just as soon as possible. I need the help. Hopefully you need the games. And I really, really do appreciate you coming and checking us out. Again, I'm Nathan Lusk, Warrior with a Pen Games, and gosh, have a great time gaming, and I hope to see you again soon at the gaming table. Have a good evening.